Um, First, I would like to ask Amy to give an elevator speech. Amy, tell your story of how you've got in here today. Amy.
Thank you, Clay. First of all, can you hear me okay? I just want to make sure. Okay, it's the first time I've spoke. So, well, not today, but in this session. So I just want to say I was nervous about being the technology challenge person that I am. I'm not getting in the session, but I'm a bit more nervous that everything is resting on my shoulders now. So I hope Darren gets in. So I'm not speaking on the entire, world of tests. But briefly, my story, I've been in international admissions and domestic admissions for 20 plus years. I've worked at the University of Oklahoma, which is a large public institution, Southern Methodist University, which is a comprehensive private institution in Dallas, Texas. And then before coming to NYU Abu Dhabi, I was at a very small private liberal arts school, St. Edward's University, located in Austin, Texas. So I have definitely dipped my toes in a wide variety of institutions, but now super excited and fortunate to be living and working in Abu Dhabi and overseeing the admissions process here at NYU Abu Dhabi. So very excited to be here with you today, Clay. I too wish I was in person at IC3 conference. When you first asked me, I was like, maybe I can go in person. But I will take it virtually, and hopefully next year we can all do this again in person. I would love that.
So Amy, one question I have for you. I've worked with you with multiple institutions, and that's always been a privilege. Could you talk a little bit about particularly NYU and the test policy now, and how it shifted, from pre-COVID to post-COVID? NYU has always been a bellwether, a leader in innovative policies, especially regarding testing and meeting students where they are. Could you talk about that for a second?
Sure, absolutely. So even before my time, NYU has, exactly what you said, kind of been a leader in testing. So for about 10 years now, NYU and all three campuses, behind me, I'm trying to represent, I have Shanghai, Abu Dhabi, and New York. And generally speaking, our admissions policies are the same for all three campuses. So for about 10 years, we have been test flexible, meaning that we would allow students to submit the type of test that they chose. So if students chose to submit an SAT, we would look at the SAT. If they chose to submit A-levels, IB, whatever it might be, we were flexible with that. And then about 4 years ago, the artistic programs in New York, Tisch School of the Arts, became test optional. And that was of their own accord. And because in New York, we admit students directly to programs, which is different than Shanghai and Abu Dhabi. And then this past year and a half now, we became test optional due to the pandemic. As with most institutions, that decision was not taken lightly. But I will say, it definitely was a reaction to students and applicants and their ability to access a test. So for last fall, we were completely test optional. For this fall, we are test optional again. So that means for applicants applying for fall 2022 at all three campuses. I'm not for sure at this moment what fall 2023 will look like for us. But it will continue to be a conversation that, NYU will take very seriously as we look at our application process. It was a process. I will say that as our senior leadership was looking at whether or not we would be able to go test optional for fall 2021, we did have artistic programs that we could lean on because they had been doing it for a few years. We also had a test group. So we took some admissions counselors, our leadership team, and we actually were looking at applications, and we would read them and we would score them, and we would make sure that if we were going to be test optional, that we truly were test optional in our review of applications. So we didn't just flip the switch one day and say, this is it, we're test optional, here we go. We were very thoughtful about it. And so we really did take the time to ensure that what we were saying we were going to do, truly we were able to do, because we really did want to be true to students, parents, college counselors, and the community as they were looking to apply to NYU. So it has been a process, but here we are, and we successfully launched it, for this fall, and looking to do it again for next fall.
And I just sent Darren a link, so I'm hoping he can join. But speaking for Skidmore, it's a little bit different than NYU in that it had been test optional prior, but only for domestic students. For international students, it had what I would call a hybrid. And hoping Darren can speak for himself here, but just moving on because of time. Oh, there's Darren.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, wonderful. I'm so happy.
Yay.
Sorry, I had to go to the yesterday's agenda and find the room, and now I'm here. So I apologize for those difficulties of coming online. And just to explain, yes, we were test optional for and have been for many of our applicants. I guess it's most of our applicants for several years. This will be maybe our seventh cycle reviewing applications with as test optional process. But then obviously due to access and challenges students had around the world, we modified that last year, and we will continue again this year to be test optional for all applicants, including international students in the process. So we made that shift and have committed to it for just this one more year. We're kind of a year by year basis for where we are now.
Thank you, Darren. And I want to give you a chance. So we have a big crowd in the room in Delhi, if I can look at the camera correct. We also have a number of folks online. Amy gave a quick elevator speech. I just want to allow you to set up, your journey in higher education, Dr. Drabek. Darren.
Sure. Thank you, Clay. I'm not quite the doctor yet. I do have a master's degree in school counseling. I spent a few years as a school counselor in a public high school here in New York, and that was kind of in between a couple of positions here at Skidmore College, and I have served both as a coordinator of international student recruitment here at Skidmore, as well as working at another liberal arts college, Lake Forest College outside Chicago, for a couple of years in international admissions. But also I spent 10 years as the international student advisor here at Skidmore, the DSO, PDSO, the RO, working with international students as scholars. So I've worked with students in the admissions cycle and our wonderful colleagues and counselors at high schools around the world, but then also with students as they've been students across their 4-year journey and beyond here at Skidmore. So especially when working with students and knowing where they've come academically when they apply and their high school experiences, and then seeing how that translates and transitions into their time as scholars and students here at our college. It's given me this different perspective and wonderful perspective to work with students across the cycle and around the cycle of students here at the college. And yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we have two very interesting but distinct perspectives that represent different backgrounds in terms of testing policy and meeting students where they are in general. Now, regarding the slides, can everyone see the slides? I have them on my screen, but is everyone ever able to see? And so I'm going to ask Soma to advance the next slide, and I'm going to give a very, very quick introduction in terms of background, and then we're going to start a conversation. And again, just to remind everyone to please add the questions or additional comments into the chat. So Soma, is it okay if we move on? Great. So this includes the welcome, introduction, context, and flavors. We're going to discuss 3 enrollment topics. One based on communicating clearly the policies and expectations. 2, we're going to start with Amy on that. And then Darren's going to talk about practical applications. So I actually called this cheekily the practical and the application, how this fits in to your role as a counselor. And then what's new and what's next will be our 3rd topic. And then we'll open up the Q&A for discussion with the audience. Next slide, and is that COVID has shifted the spectrum of test flavors and patterns. And so just to level set in terms of what terms that we're using today, the term test required is what many, now neither one of these institutions, neither Skidmore or NYU, was test required, but examples of universities that include the logos I put in because I've worked with them recently include Cornell, Northeastern, NC State were test required before the pandemic, at least for domestic students. Now, for international students, Cornell required, but for example, Skidmore, as Darren said, was test optional, but test flexible for some. A university like many publics, like NC State, Michigan State, others, was test optional. But then you had some that used the term score free. Now, this sometimes you might hear the term test blind. I think the consensus is that we're moving beyond that terminology to use a term like test free or score free. But that means that even if tests are submitted, they're not reviewed. Test optional would be if they are submitted, they would be reviewed, but they're not required to complete the application. So it can be reviewed with or without test. And as Amy mentioned before, both domestic and internationally, before the pandemic, universities like NYU, Rochester had this policy, even though they went test optional before, Colorado College and several others, but NYU was the bellwether, would be that they would require some kind of external test. But it wouldn't necessarily be the traditional, what we call a CEE, a college entrance examination like the SAT or ACT. It could be a broad range, IB, A levels, IGCSE, and so forth. Then after the pandemic, it shifted so that universities like Cornell, for certain programs, were test free, the entire UC system. But most universities gathered around simply test optional. Now, next slide. And you will have these slides, so I'm not going, this is a lot of text, but just wanted to give you where we are now. There continues to be a range of testing policies and what I consider postures. So it's important for a counselor and a student to research each of these universities because things are, or each university to which they're applying, because things are changing quickly. But overall, the universities that currently have required tests throughout are really only the Florida publics. Now, there's a lot of Florida publics, and they are popular internationally, so that's important. The temporary suspension of the requirement due to COVID, but resuming, include all of Georgia. It's public, so Georgia Tech, UGA, Georgia Southern, others. But not many others have started resuming those policies. Most have stayed either test flexible or even move to test free. And so within the slide, you'll see a number of institutions that are represented within the IC3 community. But among those test free that are spurred by COVID, the biggest would be, so again, test free, synonymous with test blind, even though I think, again, score free, test free will be what you will hear now. But the UC system, so a lot of your students within the IC3 community would be applying to the UCs, or Cal State, that great system, Caltech, at least half the programs at Cornell, so particularly the ones that are tied to SUNYs. So even, so that Ivy League school there, half of its programs are test free. CUNY, so the City University of New York campuses, as well as some SUNY campuses, including Cortland. Those that are test-free permanently and have been so for a while include Hampshire. Those that have moved this way during the pandemic include Pitzer, so a Claremont McKenna, Loyola, and WPI, which, again, a lot of students, particularly in South Asia and the Middle East, apply to. Now, next slide, and I'm going to go through this quickly. We can't know what the future holds. So, for example, back in a year ago, when MIT and Vanderbilt both announced their policies, they had very clear language on their landscape, on their own websites, indicating that they believed that they would move back to testing, that this would be a temporary policy just for that one cycle. However, if we move on to the next slide, that did not happen. Vanderbilt extended its test optional policy. And MIT the same. We are suspending the policy, even though they have very confident language. So as the field remains in flux and in upheaval, you still need to monitor what's going on with each individual institution. And just to give you some trend data, and I didn't mean to pick out Vanderbilt or MIT as being outliers. There were plenty more universities.
Sorry yes. to interrupt, Clay. Clay, we are not able to see the slides. Can you please pin the slides only? I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Oh, sure. Okay.
The slides are not visible at all. They're not clear.
Are they not clear? Okay. I'm seeing them from my viewpoint. I'm glad to share them on my screen if that would be better for you.
Yeah, I think so, because we're not able to see when all three of you are pinned with the slides.
Oh.
Are you able to change your own view?
You guys are pinned by the host itself.
Now we can change it. Now we can pin the slide.
Oh, got it. Okay. Okay, I'm going to stop. Okay, so now you can see it. So I'm going to stop sharing then. And we're to the last slide. So I apologize that you weren't able to see it. But just, and let's move forward one more slide. And it just contains simple trend data that overall, even though we're going to hear from two very distinct universities and their perspectives, what Common App has been reporting is that approximately half, so around 45% of students overall did not submit tests, did submit tests. Now, before the year before, it was more like 77%. And I've taken myself off of the slide, so I'm not reading that. So let's move forward one slide, Soma. And however, that's globally. Internationally, it's closer to, and this is an estimate because we don't have a centralized U.S. database of this, but according to the Common App, it's internationally, it's more like three-quarters, between 2/3 and 3/4 of students internationally. So those outside the U.S., our broader IC3 community did not submit tests. So I would like to start off the conversation with Amy. To kick off this section on communicating clearly, Amy, for international families, how did you convey the nuanced message of your change in policy? And how did you convince various constituents, especially those international families, that optional truly meant optional? Amy.
Well, it's like perfect timing, Clay, because the very first question that we actually got in the chat, and I'm going to scroll back up, was, the question is, so when you say you're test optional, are the students who do not submit the scores at any disadvantage compared to those who have submitted? And I would say that was our number one concern that we wanted to convey. So logistically, we put up our policy on the website, but we would also have weekly meetings with our counseling staff and with senior leadership just to ensure that we were properly getting the message out to students, to parents, and to counselors. I would say, and still happens today and has continually happened in admissions, most students and most parents, they want that absolute. But should I submit a test if I have it? And if I have exactly this score, is that a yes or is that a no? And I completely understand. And people want to say, they want assurance. This is a big process and a lot goes into it. So, and we still see that today, but what we really wanted to convey is, yes, we are test optional. Yes, we are truly going to look at the file as the exact same as a student who did submit a test and a student who did not submit a test. So we were able to put things out on the website. We were able to send out direct messaging to our counseling team. We also set up different days and times to make phone calls. So phone calls to our counselors in our database to help answer those questions. Also during our webinars, we would talk about it. So hosting virtual information sessions. So it was also part of the message that we continued to send out. We do Common App workshops of how to complete the Common App when you're going through. So this was also part of our messaging. So we were trying to kind of dot it into the different areas and how we were connecting with different constituents and hoping that we were connecting with as many students and parents and families and counselors along the way and answering questions that would come into us. We had a large number of emails that were coming in, thousands and thousands of emails that were coming into our inbox, our admissions inbox, and this was a big chunk of it. And so we were just, you could understand the anxiety, and it was not just around test. The world was kind of turned upside down. So, this was one space where students and parents just wanted reassurance. So we did our best to get that out there, that we were truly test optional. So, and still the same today.
Darren, what about you guys at Skidmore? What were your challenges in terms of communications?
Sure. And we're, just to give some context, about 11,000 applications a year, 7,000 domestic applications, about 4,000 applications from around the world. We are answering a lot of questions from students. We wish not to erect any real obstacles for students to apply and have access to applying to Skidmore and eventually a Skidmore education. And so really making that decision 2 years ago to allow international students to apply test optional because of the barrier was to reduce a barrier and make sure that any student could still apply and complete an application. So it was a lot of, and we just do a lot of personal outreach, but a lot of email outreach to students and making sure they know that they can apply, and we've changed that policy this year. Still, we're requiring, of course, English language proficiency exams across for any students that needed to submit that. So, but making that is, trying to make the application to Skidmore as accessible as possible to every student all over the world.
And Darren, Amy, remind me, and I think you hit upon this earlier, but just to clarify, for students from a country like India or South Asia where English is spoken, would they need your IELTS, TOEFL, or another English proficiency test?
We will waive that requirement for a student who is in a secondary school curriculum for 3 or more years that is English, the English medium. The primary language of instruction is English. And we would look for that on the Common Application Secondary School Report. We would look for that on the profile of the school, if that is the language of instruction for 3 or more years. Or a full IB curriculum, which is really only 2 years, but the MYP would be some additional years as well. So they would not need the IELTS or Duolingo, though, again, it is another data point that a student could submit. And if a student has the Duolingo, which we adopted a couple of years ago, making that easier to access than just about any other test, we would warmly welcome that, and that could enhance the student's application if they had it.
Amy, same for you?
I could almost say ditto. We also adapted Duolingo a couple of years ago because we found it more accessible for students. And so across all 3 campuses, we allow students to submit Duolingo. And same with us, we do require an ESL test to be submitted by students who are a non-native English speaker, or they have, like Darren said, completed 3 years of high school at an English medium high school. So that requirement has remained consistent and will be the same for next year as well. So yes, I completely agree with you. I agree with you, Darren, too, when you're talking about access to students, because it was a lot of questions we would get. It's like, well, I can do this, but I can't do that, but I can get this. And things would change, and they would change on a dime. They would change from one day to the other. And so we were really trying to be consistent with the same message of, we do not want to put you at a disadvantage. NYU is not trying to put hurdles in front of you, and we realize that every situation is different. So get us what you can in that application as much as possible, which sounds very similar to Skidmore.
And one question that Poonam has asked relates to what I was going to transition to you, Darren, which is, my question to you is, in your reading and evaluation process, could you take us into some of the practical application there within the application of how you dealt with reading without test? And then in Poonam's questions, do students who submit particularly high test scores have an advantage over others? Darren.
Sure. And and one of the reasons several years ago we're able to make that decision that we would be test optional again for most of our applicants is that The majority of the material that we're reviewing, the greatest weight that we're giving in an application review for years has been the arc of 4 years across secondary school, the curriculum, the performance, the achievement, the rigor of the program, how students have challenged themselves within that secondary school context. All of that material that comes from the school, from the student's experience, has been so much more important to us and more predictive of student success at Skidmore. And that's, you'll hear that a lot from institutions of, we're able to do our own evaluation and realize that the test scores are not as predictive on their own particular university campus as other elements of it have been. So we've always spent a lot more time on so many other elements of the holistic review of an application, the letters of recommendation. We offer interviews to any student who wishes to have one. Those interviews are helpful to us. They are evaluative. We like those opportunities to engage with students as well. So all of those many pieces, reviewing it with or without an SAT or ACT score. And there were, and this year even more, but many, many, many more students and decisions about consistent, those 3/4, of kind of what we saw across the country and of our applicants who weren't submitting SAT scores. Now, some students chose not to submit them, but they, at time of application, we accepted them later after enrollment. They are used for placement purposes. Students can test out of a quantitative section of our curriculum with an SAT or ACT score, as well as into a writing section if they have it. But if they don't have, this is practical too, if they don't have one of those tests and the student enrolls, we have our own internal diagnostic exams that allow students to test up into higher levels of quantitative classes or up into higher levels of writing. And that's, again, been something that we've had in place for a while at Skidmore as well. But we've always given a lot more weight and consideration to the other elements of it. We have been honest, though, and to be transparent, we've said to students that yes, a strong SAT or ACT score could have a positive impact on an application. It's not, it's not a guarantee of admission with any one score. It's not a discount of admission with any one score that's lower, but it could have a positive impact when we're reviewing in our, sometimes our it comes down to the fine points of making those micro decisions at some point. So it could have, but it's always a could, because a student with a very high score, but all those other elements of the application are not strong, that's not going to be a student that we will admit, but it could have a positive impact on an application.
And Amy, as you and your NYU Abu Dhabi reviewers look at the context of a student, could you articulate, that very practical aspect of the role?
Yeah, we're the same way. I mean, a little bit different in that NYU received about 100,000 applications, which I'm not necessarily advocating for. It's its own beast of burden. And so, which actually surprised me this year. I mean, the good news is kids are still going to college, which is nice to see in this field. But we did the same thing. And actually, we worked on training because, as you can imagine, we have external readers to help us get all of those. And so we really wanted to ensure that all of our current counselors and external readers understand that a standardized test is just that. It's a standardized test. And it does give you some data, but it's something that happened on one day and one point. Following up on what Darren said, it is just one piece of the puzzle. And so really, layering that onto the other information that we might have. So it also allows us, and because we are counselors and we're not machines making the decision, and there's some great schools out there that say you have a test score and a GPA, you're automatically admitted. We require and encourage our counselors to get to know schools, to get to know curriculums, to get to know students. And so when you're reading that application, we're taking the time and digging into it and really trying to understand the rigor, the course selection, the grades, and kind of what that means and what the student is able, to bring to the institution. So we spend a lot of time in training. And it's not it from day one. We ask each other a lot of questions. There's more than one person that reads a file. So we really do try to have eyes on, our applications and to understand what students are submitted as to us.
Now, Selma, our monitor our IC3 monitor in the room, I want to make sure we're respectful of time. What I'm seeing is that there's a university exhibit going on at 6:15. We're eating into your break, but is everyone okay if we just turn it over to questions, and that we'll go right until 6:15 with your questions before we say goodbye? Or does everyone need to leave to get ready for the university exhibit? What's the best thing to do here? Asking Soma.
Do you all have any questions? Yeah. Ma'am, you can use the mic in the center. Clay, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes.
Right. So there are a couple of people who would like to ask some questions, so we can probably go ahead with that. All right.
Okay, so we just wanted to be respectful, and again, apologize that we were running a little bit late. So yes, we're open to any and all questions that you have, either from the room, or you can unmute yourself. You have control for our dozen folks that are participating.
Hi, good morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. This is Sangeeta from Delhi, a Clay familiar face. Just a question and more an observation, actually. I think as someone who looks after students in a school, I know the SAT or any other kind of testing of this kind puts immense pressure on students. And I have to tell you, we were all smiling when we heard that there are universities that are not considering, making this absolutely essential. And I'm going to flip this back to you and say, as a university, as the people at university who are discussing this, what has your learning been through it? I mean, was it or was it not possible for you to figure out who are the students who are best suited for your university without that test? And if it was possible, then really the question that begs to be asked is, why do we need them at all in the future?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and
Darren, Amy, who wants to start with that? I love that question.
Ma'am, she has a third question to add to that, so maybe we'll shoot them all out and you can, take care of it after.
Great.
She probably, Sangeeta might be asking as a principal. I'm a college counselor, and I would then say that, okay, and this is in the interest of the students. I'm talking from the students' perspective. What would it then take to make their application stand out? I know academics are not everything, but when I look at Skidmore and I look at NYU, yes, I do not believe that they are not that important. So what would it take to reassure the student that my application is kind of good enough to be accepted? Thank you.
So I'll start with the first question. When talking, I completely agree. I think the cat's out of the bag. And I think it will be interesting to see how many universities revert back to a test required. I think we're still going to see. And I think ultimately, to answer your question, to really understand student success is going to take 4 years, because we need to see how students go from semester 1 to semester 2, from year 1 to year 2, graduation rates, what happens after. I mean, we have some very early data of how they've done on campus, but most of our institutions, when we're looking at success rate and student success, we're looking at all 4 years, and how did they do when they started here, and really digging into that data to see what students are successful. And there are some different data points that you can look at that. So I don't have an answer for you. I don't know. I think we're in interesting times right now, but I do think that there are going to be a lot of senior leaders at cross campuses across the United States that are going to say, does it even make sense for us to revert back to test requirements? And I don't have an answer for you, but I think we'll see in the next 6 to 8 months, once institutions start putting out the requirements for fall 2023. So, we'll see about that. I'll let Darren take the next, he can add or take the next question, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, well, I mean, just a simple answer was yes. Could we class, could we make our admission decisions without tests for many, many, many of our students? Yes, we did, and we were proud of the quality of the enrolled students. We were excited about the students who were engaged with us. It really, our practice has often been, and, if you were to ask me, did, student that we admitted, this one have SAT scores, ACT scores, this one didn't, I don't know. They're both, there's so much more to the student than those singular tests. And then I also think about, and did we make, we are a need aware admission practice. We meet 100% of demonstrated need. It's very selective for us, for students applying for financial aid, especially who require full awards. But we made those decisions, some with tests, some without tests. We look so much more deeper at the other materials of the application. We've worked with some students from, it's curricula that we know very well and schools that we know very well. We rely on our knowledge of that information so much more, and it was highlighted. I think it may have been highlighted that these last couple of years a little bit more to get to know the schools and get to know the curricula and the students. If we didn't have that extra data point, but yes, we did it, and then in terms of other things that students can do to stand out, and I talked about our interviews, something we really like, and engagement with the student that is helpful to us. The other parts of the common application, the essay, the letters of recommendation. I mean, those are our opportunities for students to be highlighted, and their experiences, their life experiences, their opportunities that they can share with us, help us stand out. Again, there's nothing one element to it that I could say that will get a student in, but there's those different components. We love those components to the application to help us get to know students.
Go ahead, Amy.
No, I was going to say, I agree. I mean, we admitted a class, we're enrolling in a class. We did not see a lot of melt, so we were able to do it, we've, had very few students off the wait list this summer. And I agree with you, Darren. I wish I could give students or counselors or principals, if you just do this, I can guarantee you at least, an option. And unfortunately, that's just not possible. Try to tell students to put their best, just be themselves, which I know is hard, but whatever you can do to put that in an application, it's my best recommendation. I'm sorry, Clay, go ahead.
No.
Okay.
I want to hear you and Darren's voice more than mine. Trust me. Any other questions? Those were some great ones.
Well, I saw a question in the chat about, for the next class of students and students traveling to take another test. I mean, we said this a lot more, 2 years ago, last year. Don't put yourself in risk. Don't put yourself in high positions of stress to take these exams. There are our colleges. There are many other colleges to which students can apply without a test. But the reality may be still, and there's diversity of institutions out there, that a test may have more of a positive impact on a merit scholarship, or a test may have more of a positive impact on admission. And so if a student has access to it and can take it safely, and keeping their health and their family's health and everything else in consideration, then there's no reason maybe not to choose to do it. And that would be, then again, there's also, and speaking from a college that doesn't have merit scholarships, it's all need-based financial aid. We make many of those admission decisions were made without the tests, and we admitted and enrolled many students receiving financial aid without tests. So it's possible to get into colleges without a test and afford a college without a test. Just thinking about that question in particular.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I was going to say one last thing. I say, if you have the option to take the test and it's super easy, it doesn't mean you have to submit it. You can have it in your back pocket, like just in case you wake up January 1st and you're like, I want to apply to this school and they require it. Then you have it as an option.
I think one thing to remember as we shift to talk about the future, and at least during the pandemic, I don't know about you guys, Amy and Darren, but my crystal ball has been a bit fuzzy of late. It's very hard to predict what's going to happen. That said, a quick point is that I hope you can remind your students and your parents that even among those institutions that required a traditional CEE, an SAT or an ACT, it wasn't always, or at many of those institutions, it wasn't a big factor in decision making. And so I love your point about then why was it required? Well, sometimes it would provide benchmarks. It would, and many universities that I've spoken to outside of NYU and Skidmore have told me, even from Stanford University, which is of course highly selective, to public universities that like SUNY University at Buffalo that had required, they were surprised how easy it was to make decisions without the SAT. What they missed regarding a benchmark, ACT or SAT, is regarding yield. So being able to predict who would enroll, I think, was a bit more problematic when you don't have a common metric. I don't think that will force universities to return. I do think you'll see some. You'll see perhaps a Georgetown, perhaps an MIT return that way. But one thing to keep in mind for those of you, you guys are in Delhi, Darren is in Saratoga, I'm in Brooklyn, Amy is in Abu Dhabi. So we're representing multiple time zones around the world. One thing that we don't have represented is California. With the UC system and the Cal State system not requiring it all and not even looking at it, many universities in the US and around the world need California students. I would think that may have an impact on how soon folks would require if California students aren't testing en masse. So with that, I want to thank you in the audience for being here and listening to us. I want to thank Amy and Darren for their patience as we dealt with some tech issues, but it's been a great conversation from my point of view, and I just admire the IC3 community and admire these leaders so much. So thank you. Apologies, I didn't share my screen earlier with the slides. I will make sure you all have access to a PDF of the slide deck that IC3 will be able to send around. You can always get in touch with me, and I'll put my email into the chat. So it's clayhensley@gmail.com. And this will also be in the slide deck, and I have Amy and Darren's email there, but Amy, Darren, if you want to put yours there as well. Please keep in touch, and everyone stay safe and strong. Enjoy the conference and be well. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.